Welcome to NewYorkBIOs Virtual Breakfast Series, a digital program started in 2020 bringing you fireside chats with leaders across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Shara Ticku, CEO and co-founder of C16 Biosciences, and Marc Fogarty, partner and national biotech sector leader at EisnerAmper.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hawksland, and I'm the CEO at NewYorkBIO. We are very excited that you're here with us for another exciting and final 2022 edition of our virtual breakfast series. We will be taking off the next few weeks for the holidays and back at it again in early January. I do believe we'll be back at it again the Tuesday of JP Morgan. So I might be propping my eyelids open at 6 a.m. West Coast time. As always, thank you so much to our sponsor for this month's series of breakfast, EisnerAmper. They've been great partners, and we're excited to have Marc here from EisnerAmper today to join our conversation with Shara about C16. Housekeeping. Always, please ask your questions in the chat or the Q&A boxes, and Derek and I will get to those throughout the course of our conversation. With that, I will turn it over to Derek to kick it off. Thanks.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I like to say this a lot, but we have another good episode that has, I think, a little bit of everything. As you know, we always like to talk about what's next. I'm excited to talk about synthetic biology. I'm excited to talk about biotech companies that have like actual revenues and things, which are exciting. And finally, I was at the NYC EDC holiday party over at InnoLabs this week, and 3 people said, oh, have you met Shara Ticku? She has this awesome company, C16, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, funny thing, I'm going to talk to her on Tuesday. So with that, Shara, Marc, it's great to have both of you here. Why don't you both introduce yourselves a little bit, and we will get into the conversation.
Sure. You want me to go first?
Go for it.
Marc Fogarty, audit partner and national biotech sector leader with EisnerAmper. Interesting fact, 3 days ago, I celebrated my 20th year with the firm, which in dog years, I guess, feels like 140, however that math works out. And as you probably all heard in the morning, I don't like warm beverages, so there's another fun fact for everybody.
I don't have as many fun facts. I do drink hot beverages, but my name is Shara Ticku. I am the co-founder and CEO of C16 Biosciences. Derek, do you want us to sort of jump into background a little bit more, or do you want to lead us there?
Oh, let's get into your background. I want to know where you came from. I want to know how you got into what you got into. One of the taglines in your article on C16 says you spent a lot of your career talking about failed supply chains. And let's talk about that, because I imagine that actually dovetails right nicely into the C16 story.
Yeah, great. So yes, mostly in failed supply chains and mostly in healthcare. But before that, I started my career at Goldman Sachs. So I moved to New York a bit over a decade ago. My first job was at Goldman, and I sat on the trading floor. Really fun job, great first job. I learned a lot, worked with great people. And one of the things that I got to do there was I had a really good opportunity early on to take on a book of our business covering our international clients. And so in 2013, I went to Asia to meet with a couple of our big accounts in Hong Kong and in Singapore. And when I got on the plane to go to Singapore, Goldman had sent me with a stack of N95 masks. Again, this was 2013. It was not 2020. And it had nothing to do with a virus, right? It had to do with the air quality index. And when I landed in Singapore, the air quality index was over 400, and anything over 300 is considered toxic. Anything over 150 is considered hazardous. The air quality index in New York this morning was 47. So in our sort of highly polluted city of New York, 47. Singapore was over 400. And I had no clue what this was about. I was just told to wear a mask, and we felt this sort of thick haze in the air. And I found out very, very quickly from my colleagues that what was happening was producers of industrial farmers in their neighboring countries of Indonesia and Malaysia were burning down rainforest to clear the way for palm oil plantations. And this was the first time that I had ever heard about palm oil. We'll come back to that in a minute, but it was it was really like the first time I saw climate change in my face, 2013.
Yeah.
Burning rainforest and seeing thick smoke in the air. At this point, I had already decided to leave Goldman and go work in healthcare. So I think life sciences had always been something that was a passion of mine, biology in particular. My dad was a neuropharmacologist, so he sort of instilled a love of science in me from a very young age. But at this point, I had decided to go into healthcare from a sort of systems level. And so I left Goldman and I went to go work for the Clinton Health Access Initiative. And really what we did was work on increasing access to medicine globally. So largely, working on market failures where we had solutions to problems. Over 1 million children per year die from pneumonia, totally treatable, but we can't really get the access right. We can't get the supply chain right. And I spent a lot of my time working on reproductive health, sexual health, and fertility, which I fell into, but was something that I loved a lot and felt very passionate about. So I spent many of those years thinking about, what goes on when we have a solution to something. We have a drug, but it's too expensive for many of the people that need access to it, right? We don't have the right paying mechanisms to get access to the people who need the medicine. And we don't have the right supply chains and infrastructure. We don't have the cold chain. We don't have the data to understand where it needs to go. We're not even able to match supply and demand of these things because we lack basic data. So I spent a lot of my career working in the sort of broken supply chains of global health, which I really loved. But I was basically on a flight to Africa like every 2 or 3 weeks. I was spending tons of my time there. And I think realistically looking around saying, we're here trying to support improvement of supply chains in these sub-Saharan African countries and in these Southeast Asian countries, but like our own healthcare system has its own set of problems, and that's a $17 trillion industry, and maybe there's something there. And so from there, I went to business school. I went to Boston. I went to Harvard, and I was really focused on healthcare. But there was this little bit around sort of commercializing innovations from academic labs. There's so much, especially in biology labs, that comes out but doesn't get commercialized. And I was curious about the different levers we could pull to increase that. And Boston was, of course, a great place to explore that. And, I can talk about the origin story of C16, which sort of starts there, but maybe I'll pause, Derek.
Well, that sounds good. So Marc, why don't you talk a little bit about let's talk about like the last 5 years in healthcare, because I think we've seen an incredible amount of growth in terms of where companies come from and what the environment looks like. And I think that's going to actually fuel a lot of the story for where young companies are going to go over the next 5 years, right? We kind of had this incredible marketplace where we had these enormous funding rounds. We had an availability of capital that we hadn't seen in a long time. And that apparently, I think, has probably tailed off. So why don't you talk a little bit about kind of the marketplace now, and then we can get into kind of where C16 sits and how that's going to go in the future.
Yeah, sure. The healthcare space and pharma drugs, this is sort of a metamorphosis over the last 5 years for sure. One thing we're seeing a lot of is artificial intelligence being used as part of healthcare and trying to identify different levers and pulling, different, I guess for lack of a better term, different treatments for folks. Certainly some companies are using it to improve insurance rates. Some companies are looking at it to narrow down sort of scopes of drugs and where they ultimately see treatments to be, and I think that is sort of given a new birth to new companies for different treatments. And certainly I'm not a synthetic bio person by any stretch of the imagination, but I imagine some of that new wave is what sort of led Shara to her path and coming here. So.
And do you think that? I was going to say, and do you think that? I mean, as we take one step back, right? So we're on the cusp of where C16 is coming from, right? But we've sort of heard Shara's evolution of her thought process around sort of how you develop that. How should other entrepreneurs, I mean, from your perspective, Marc, and the clients you advise, how should other entrepreneurs be thinking about how to plan, right? If they want to take what they see as a major problem and look at solutions. And that may mean spitting out technology. It may mean coming up with their own ideas and forming a company around that. How should they be thinking about that?
I guess patience is number one. I mean, I think people, I think the better part of some of the sessions that I've listened into to you guys for the last several weeks, I think the number one thing is people have to understand that, you're going to fail, and you're probably going to fail a lot. And, you could pitch your idea to 100 different people, and 99 of them are going to tell you it's the worst thing in the world, that it's that 100th that somehow gets you through it. And I think that perseverance is what goes on. I think too many times people they're so set on what they want to do. And sometimes if they are very sensitive to that and they're told no, they kind of just fold up shop and move on. And I think, for most entrepreneurs, I just don't think that's the mindset they need. I think they got to run through a brick wall, and then, as soon as they do, another brick wall comes up, and they got to continue to do that. And I mean, I'm sure Shara's been told probably 100 times why her process isn't going to work, or her product is ultimately not going to work. And it's, her perseverance is what's gotten her to where she is today. And I think most entrepreneurs are in that same boat too. I mean, they just, I think they, a lot of them maybe they just don't, their ears just don't hear the word no. Maybe that's part of it.
They can't process that.
They can. I mean, certainly as accountants, we hear no a lot, and we probably tell no a lot for certain things, whether it's timing of financial reports or other things, or things you can or can't do in, financial world or tax world. But, I think the entrepreneur spirit is just that, you're your own destiny and you can control it. I mean, obviously, you need barriers, other people provide barriers for you, and it's your job to knock those down. But, so I think just a general message for most entrepreneurs is just to persevere, and obviously if you believe in your product. And, it's always a shame when companies can't, they have a good product and either they can't deliver the message the correct way to investors and seeing it forward, and ultimately things fail. I mean, sometimes things fail not because it doesn't necessarily work. It's just because maybe the leadership, isn't the right leadership to bring that product forward. And, sometimes that just, that part's a little unfortunate.
All right, Shara. So your mission in the next few minutes is to tell us where C16 came from, tell us how it came together, and tell us about the first person that told you it was never going to work.
God, yes. Really, truly have lost count many years ago. So I was in Boston. I was getting my MBA. As I mentioned, I was really focused on healthcare. But there was this sort of sliver around life sciences commercialization that I was interested in. And so as I explored that, again, Boston was a great place to explore it. And I ended up over at the MIT Media Lab, which is a place that's kind of notorious for commercializing moonshots and commercializing wacky science that people say could never be done. But you've got brilliant people there, and you've got a really interesting sort of capital structure and innovation structure to support it. So I ended up at the Media Lab, which is where I met my future co-founders. Although at the time, not one of us really had interest in becoming entrepreneurs. We all had sort of different paths. Harry was getting his PhD at Harvard in physics, but really in the field of synthetic biology. And David was an undergrad at MIT studying bioengineering and hoping to go to med school when he graduated. And there were two things that really brought us together as a team. The first was that my co-founder Harry had just been down to Costa Rica and had a remarkably similar experience to the one that I described earlier around palm oil. So he went down to Costa Rica and they went to go see the rainforest. And when they sort of got there, they were shocked to see that the rainforest had been cleared. And instead there were these perfectly planted rows of industrial palm plantations. He came back from this trip and he told us about his trip. And I had this sense of deja vu from what had happened to me a few years ago. And we started just poking at it. We started sort of saying okay, this palm oil thing keeps popping up. And we realized that at the time, palm oil was a $60 billion industry. It was in 50% of products on supermarket shelves. So totally ubiquitous, totally unavoidable. And the interesting thing we saw was actually a really interesting, a clearly articulated pain point around palm oil, because hundreds, every major consumer packaged good or fast moving consumer goods company had made a public commitment to stop using what's known as conflict palm oil, which engages mainly in deforestation. Palm oil is also known for human rights abuses, including slave labor and child labor. But the environmental impact, the fact that it emits almost 1 billion tons of CO2 emissions a year had been sort of really, brought front and center to a lot of these big CPGs. And they'd all made these public commitments to their shareholders in their annual letters, to their stakeholders, their consumers, that they were going to stop using it because they started feeling pressure, both from consumers and then, but increasingly more so now from investors, from asset owners and their board to do something on their deforestation commitment. So we realized, okay, we've both seen the impact of palm oil on climate change, on biodiversity, on the natural ecosystem. We've also now realized that it's a really big industry with a clearly articulated pain point. And the other thing that had happened, that had brought us together that month, this was September 2016, was that Impossible Foods had just launched their very first product here in New York at Momofuku Nishi. And the three of us had heard about this, and we were really excited because this was the first time that we had seen sort of engineered biology producing a consumer product. It wasn't a drug, it wasn't insulin, it wasn't a chemical, it wasn't a biofuel. It was a burger. And we thought that was just the coolest thing. And so we kind of put these two together and we just started talking, and we sort of said, okay, so palm oil is this vegetable oil, these people have articulated this problem, but why haven't they solved it yet? Like, why is this still a problem? Why can't agriculture solve this problem? And as we looked at it, we realized that the other vegetable oils or, sources of fats like animals really couldn't solve the palm oil problem, basically because they didn't make the right product. They didn't make a product which performed in the way that palm oil performs. And a lot of people think that palm is so popular because it's cheap. It's actually not really true. It's actually because it's really good at what it does, and the existing substitutes aren't good enough. And so we asked the question, could we, instead of using agriculture, instead of using the sort of animal and plant kingdom, could we use biology, microbiology? Could we use the fungal kingdom to solve this problem instead? And what would have to be true? And so we're in this MIT class, and we had sort of $1,000. And so we just did a little experiment to start. And we made about this much oil, but it kind of looked and functioned like palm oil. And we were like, that's cool. And really from there, we started building from first principles. So we said, okay, if you're going to use microbiology to solve this problem, what needs to be true? You need to make an oil which looks and functions like palm oil. So you need to be able to produce an oil which has this complex profile. You need to be able to scale it really largely, massive scale. So you need microorganism which is robust. So you need something which can grow in really wide temperature ranges. It needs to grow in really wide pH ranges, which historically in the field of synthetic biology had been a challenge. We had seen a lot of organisms which could make products, but when you scale it, if the temperature changes by 5 degrees, the whole thing breaks.
Yep.
So this was really about saying, okay, we've seen some stuff work in this field, but what would the future for making this have to look like? And so we sort of built out this criteria, and we sort of screened hundreds, thousands of microorganisms, and we kind of came up with the strategy that we thought was the most compelling. And basically from there, we entered the MIT 100K. We were finalists. We won the Harvard President's Innovation Award. We got second place. So they gave us $25,000 on a big check. And with that, we sort of took our first lab bench out, and we hired an intern. And we just kept going. And so basically it really started with experience of this problem, identification of problem, from first principles, trying to ask, why hasn't it been solved? And if we were to use this field to try to solve the problem, what would have to be true? And do we think it's possible? And then it was sort of a series of small steps and experiments and testing and getting feedback. And we just kept getting pretty positive feedback. So you asked me the first person that said no. Honestly, in the early days, I think people started to say, this is cool. This is really interesting. This is clearly a huge problem. This is clearly a big market. You've got some technology that works, but the reality was like, we weren't a company yet, right? We were just like a bunch of students still at this point exploring an idea. So I actually think we got more encouragement than we did criticism at that time. Although I think, of course, once you become a company and you start going out to fundraise or something like this, the dynamics change. And so the first no we probably got was probably some point when we started transitioning to becoming a company and said, okay, we think there's enough of the there. We're going to jump in full time. We're going to quit the path that we all had going forward, and we're going to do this full time. And we decided to do that in 2018.
Well, it's interesting. I think there's got to be a word for this, and it's almost like either the fan yes or like the unweighted yes or something like that, because I think people want to be excited for you, right? I think people hear the story, they listen to the good parts of the story, and they want to believe it's true, and they want to like see you on this journey because it's an exciting journey, right? You've said we're going to solve this problem, and everybody is like, oh man, that sounds like a really big problem. I hadn't heard of that. It's like, oh, and what you're doing sounds really reasonable, right? It's actually hard to, you can convince yourself that you're doing a really good thing if you talk to a lot of people that are just genuinely excited that you're doing it.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's right. And then, yes, when you start, asking for money or something, and as it should be, right? And I mean, I think, that's not to say that like everyone should say yes. And I think that the fundraising ecosystem exists for the reasons that it does. But but in general, investors are looking to say no, not yes. And so, it's like a totally different mentality versus other people who want to see. And even I would say, like, I'm grateful for the ecosystem at the Media Lab, which is a place where they just say yes to the most insane things, and they encourage pushing that. I mean, I think that had so much to do with our founding story, and it's really important to have that. And I think universities in general are very good at that. Other founders are also good at doing that, and they can also give you the sort of more cautious yes, but they also they believe, and they sort of support that optimism a bit better.
Well, and you also had, I don't know if it's the beauty or the challenge, right, of a clearly defined problem, like you said, external companies had already made a commitment to doing something about that problem, and a significant addressable market. So like you all sort of unintentionally had, it's so amazing because you had individual experiences that led you all to sort of this triangle of really like important place in time that allowed you all to really make a difference. And I think it's an amazing story.
No, it's right. And I think it is both a beauty and a curse, because, like our TAM is huge. Palm oil is a $60 billion market today. But what we've developed, so C16 is we've developed a platform for producing next generation ingredients to decarbonize consumer products.
Right.
And the ingredients that we're focused on are fats and oils. And the first product that we've made is an alternative to palm oil. And we think hands down, it's the most important and the most challenging problem to solve. And that's why it's our first product. Yeah. But we're interested in the broader oils and fats market. And that's a $250 billion market. Yeah. And as the world population is projected to grow to 10 billion people by 2050, it's projected to grow 3 to 4x. So it's actually projected to be about a $900 billion market, almost $1 trillion market by 2050. In conjunction with the net zero emissions targets that we need to reach by 2050, which is great. But like, it's almost such a large market that people discount it, which is an interesting thing. And so I think for us, it's been very, very important to say, like, it is a huge opportunity, but what does that really look like? The market that we're first launching in, and really sort of taking off the sort of the bite size of it. Our first market is this really interesting beauty and personal care market. It's really attractive for all these reasons. And that looks like this. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword because it's a massive market and everybody is drawn to solving those really, really big problems. Right. But it's almost so big that people find it sort of like, how do we, like, it's almost like the number doesn't even resonate.
Yeah. Paralyzing for lack of a better term too.
Yeah.
Just if I could ask a question, did you find that the companies that made a commitment to reducing this are actually doing that? Because I know if I look at like financial reporting, at least in the public markets, there's a, years ago there was a conflicts mineral disclosure that people had to put out, which I don't think anybody ever contemplated sort of oils necessarily as being part of that. I think they were looking at coal mines and things like that. But did you find that that's something that's like they just make a blanket statement to look good in the sort of the public marketplace? And I mean, it's not to bash companies that say they're doing it and not, but I'm just curious if.
Yeah. So here's what we saw. So we saw a lot of these public companies making statements that they were going to stop using conflict palm oil, or they would remove conflict palm oil from their supply chain by 2015. And then it was by 2018, and then it was by 2020.
Yeah.
So we saw them making the commitments, but they kept sort of moving the milestone. They kept moving the deadline. And I'll take sort of two sides to this. On the one hand, with ESG, there's not been enforcement. There's not been accountability, right? Companies can just say, I'm going to do this. And then there's little to no accountability or follow-up or measurement. At the same time, they really didn't have alternatives. And part of, I think, what our job is to say, like, they've made the commitments and maybe there's no accountability, but they really also didn't have alternatives. And part of our job is to demonstrate that there is a viable alternative. And now that there is, and now that we're bringing it to life, we get to hold them accountable and say, you've made this commitment and you haven't done it because you've said we can't, there's really no option, but now it's here. And now you're going to face increasing pressure from your consumers, but again, also from your investors and your boards to start making that change. And I think I started to see that even, I've got a lot of friends in the investing world, and they're starting to get questions from their limited partners, their LPs, as they're looking to invest in funds about palm oil specifically in their portfolio. And so, it's a mixed bag, Mark. I mean, I think to answer your question, it's like, no, and I think there's a lot of room for improvement on accountability for ESG, but also we're just starting to see innovation around climate tech.
Yeah.
When I raised our first funding round in 2018, climate tech was not a word. The amount of funding that has come in to support climate innovation, the amount of innovation in synthetic biology and other fields, it's really exploded recently. The IPCC report hadn't come out in 2018. So we're also new on the innovation side. And I think we need to it's really, really important that we keep funding it, but then getting it in those big partners for pilots and for trials.
So for companies that did make, other than just sort of push back and say, wait, we're waiting on the technology, right, to be developed, what would their recourse have been to eliminate conflict palm oil? Really tighten down their own supply chains?
So so I mean, I think the big thing is just it's these supplier agreements. So a lot of these, think about really big consumer goods companies. I mean, Unilever is the single largest buyer of palm oil in the world. So if you think about Unilever as an example, they have massive long-term supply agreements. They have really long sort of schedules for getting their suppliers on board. They turn long-term supply agreements. But more than anything, there's just a lot of decision makers around those supplier decisions, right? You've got C-suite, you've got sustainability groups, you've got procurement, you have R&D, and you have marketing. And so I think a lot of times what happens is, and for a company like ours, you're not looking for a yes, you're looking to get through all the no's. And so I think that's sometimes that can be one of the challenges. And that's why, I mean, I think the way that we've approached this is, yes, Unilever is the largest single buyer of palm oil in the world. That doesn't make them a great first customer. We need to figure out how to work with them and how to get them on board for our mission. But we have better customers who are ready to launch with us next year, who can make a decision from sample to purchase order in 3 months and can launch and tell our story and bring our product to market. And so part of what we have to do is really kind of push that change uphill to those big consumer packaged good companies, because they're slow, because they have so much sort of decision making. So really it would be in their sort of supply chain, but it involves a lot of momentum to turn that big ship around.
Right. Well, it also involves proving yourself, right? If you've never sold to anyone before, you don't have everything that you need. I mean, just the processes around I'll throw out quality control, but in general, if Unilever wants to look at all your processes and you don't know what to show them, that is not a good sign.
Yeah.
Right. So the actual level of being able to deliver commercially for, a customer when you're not exactly sure what all of those hoops are going to be, that's a huge challenge. So what you were talking about before, I had wanted to ask about, instead of thinking about it as an entire market, what's like an accessible piece of that market, which seems to be what you've done.
Yep. Yeah. So I would say, with the big sort of market, food is the really big opportunity. And I would say a lot of people in this industry are chasing food. Alternative proteins is probably a word that maybe many people have heard. Since 2020, there's been $8 billion of funding into alternative proteins as people figure out, how do we feed a growing planet sort of in more sustainable and scalable ways? What's been really overlooked is the alternative fat space. So alternative proteins has seen $8 billion of funding. Alternative fats and oils has only seen 100 million in that same timeline. So 80x less, despite the fact that if you take a burger, 70% of the calories from that burger come from fat. And all of the performance elements of that burger, mouthfeel, taste, the way that it cooks, it comes from fat. So it's been really interesting because we work in this, this space, which is like proteins is like really sexy and fat is fat, and so
Right.
it's been really interesting. So food is the really big opportunity, but it is not our first market. And there are a few reasons why. It is really challenging to get performance at or better in food.
Yeah.
And performance is really, really important. At or better performance is really, really important. The food industry is cost sensitive. So you've got to be coming from a compelling cost perspective. And as an early innovator, we're not cost competitive. We have a cost curve, which will get us there, right? But we have a cost curve, which will come down, but we're not there yet. And then the third is regulatory. So it's not as intense of a regulatory environment as you would see for therapeutics. But it does take time and money to hear back from the FDA and be ready to go. So we have instead taken a very different approach, which is to go after a smaller but not niche market that's much more compelling. So we've gone after a market with no regulatory requirements, really high margins, about 80%, 90% gross margins for our customers, lower volumes, but really high price points. And, like I'm inclined to make a joke that it could be like SaaS customers. It's not, it's beauty, the beauty industry. So the global beauty and personal care industry is, I think many people think it's niche. It is a $560 billion global industry. It is big. Palm oil alone in that industry is somewhere between $3 and $6 billion. Again, not that small. And it's a great market. And we've had a ton of sort of resonance with skincare companies in particular. It's an industry where they really value innovation and R&D, and they're incredible marketers. And so we've got this really great intersection where we have an innovative, product story, biotech, intersecting with one of the biggest trends in the space, sustainability. And it's a story that people want to tell. And so we've seen really, really good traction. And our first product, which we've made, so we've got a brand which is called Palmless. And this is our sort of
hold it at the right distance so it doesn't get blurred by.
I know, yes, there you go.
I know, it's tricky. This is an oil, which we're now selling, which will be our first product with first customers in 2023. And it does everything they want. It tells the biotech story, innovation story, it tells the sustainability story, and it tells a performance story. There are things that in our oil that they can put on front of pack that will drive customers to buy it. So that's been our strategy, and we love it. We really like it. It's a great way to sort of bring product to market and to take biotech, which is all about promise. It's all about future for these big markets, and start to make it real and to de-risk it, to build trust. And by the way, to build up our supply chain, because the other reason we're not ready to sell to someone like Unilever is we've got to start scaling up our supply. And so, but what this enables us to do is scale up supply at the same time that demand is scaling up, so that we're not just having to invest in supply and just counting it as cost, but we're able to offset that with revenue. And in fact, we'll be gross margin positive on our first product, which is, I talk to people in other industries and they're like, yeah, I would hope you're gross margin positive.
Yes, like why would you get investors if you were not? Yeah.
But as we know, it's not always true in a lot of markets. So yeah.
Well, and as a significant supporter of the industry, your first target industry, I'm excited to see that. And you're right though. You've chosen an industry that also the consumer is very conscious about the specific ingredients in the skincare that they use, whether it's for them or for like children or, right? It's really important.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just say a couple things. So on sustainability, which is really interesting. So NYU has put out data which shows that in consumer products, sustainably marketed products are selling 7x faster than non-sustainably marketed products, even though they're 40% more expensive. So comparable products, the sustainably marketed products are 40% more 40% more expensive, but they're growing 7x faster. So that's some of that consumer demand. When we talk about ESG, there's a lot of different components. That's the consumer side of it. And maybe to just talk about New York for a minute, we think it's a great place to build a biotech company focused on consumer problems. And we describe ourselves as a consumer biotechnology company more than even a synthetic biology company, because synthetic biology is a part of what we do. Engineering the microorganisms or evolving the microorganisms is a part of what we do. We also do fermentation. We also do large scale chemical engineering. We do product development. We do marketing, right? And so we describe ourselves as a consumer biotechnology company. And this is an incredible place to build that company because we've now got lab space. We've got our 20,000 square foot headquarters here at the Hudson Research Center on 54th. I'm looking at the Empire State Building and the Hudson River, and it's beautiful. And I've been able to get sort of best-in-class talent across all of those on the science side, which I think many people thought would be challenging, but has to some extent been an advantage for us. But also on the other side, on my finance team, my head of marketing came from Ogilvy. She spent 25 years in a best-in-class advertising agency. And it's been a really interesting place to sort of build and bring all of those skill sets together to solve these consumer applications problems.
It sounds like you're there's always a war on talent, at least the last 2 years, probably at every level. It sounds almost like your mission statement alone is sort of helping you solve that a little bit. I think you're able to draw people because they know, I know ESG has turned into a buzzword for some, but for some it's not. Some it's an actual mission statement and things to go forward. And I know the public companies are going to be required to start sort of opining and reporting on that as in the future. And I think these are type of things that companies like yourself seem like you're miles ahead of where others are, and you're probably miles ahead of dragging talent away from other companies that find themselves in a rut.
It's definitely an advantage. I'm not a things are always rosy type of founder. I talk about things that are not good too. And I think one of those things has been maybe less so right now, but over the last 2 years, wage inflation has been a very real thing. And during the last 2 years of COVID, when many companies went remote, I'm an employee looking for a job and I'm sitting at home on Zoom, and then I move on to my next job and I'm sitting in the same chair on the same Zoom, right? Culture started to matter less. Mission started to matter less. Wage was the tool, the chip that companies had. And so over the last 2 years, I think wage inflation was really real. And as an earlier stage startup, that's just not what we can compete on. And so it was a bit challenging for the last couple of years. That being said, I think we have a total A+ team, and every one of them is really driven by the mission. And I think it does so many good things for our culture and the way that we do things and make decisions and behave as a company, that it's a massive benefit. So hiring, I think it does matter, but so does salary. And sometimes we can win and sometimes we can't. But once people are here, it makes this place a really, really special place to work, I think.
And talk to us a little bit about sort of the challenges of building out a commercialization sort of team and process while you're doing your sort of your R&D, right, to get to your product, because that is not typical for life sciences, right? You know, early stage companies, or if they're headed toward commercialization, or they're going to build out a long-term commercialization organization, but that takes years in some cases.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. We don't have the infrastructure, and Marc, you may be a good person to talk about this. We don't have the same infrastructure as you do in sort of therapeutics, right? We don't have the same infrastructure in terms of, licensing models, or even the extent of CDMOs for manufacturing. It's not in our industry yet. I think it will be, but we're still nascent and it's still being developed. A lot of the CDMO infrastructure is currently being developed, but we haven't really seen sort of licensing or a lot of those sort of acquisition or distribution partners come into play yet. And so you kind of have to figure it out is one thing. The second thing is, I think again, for a consumer biotech, it is a massive advantage to be able to have a brand, Pomless, which, by the way, this is Intel Inside. So this is going on our customers' pack. So it's their marketing dollars. We get the benefit of it. To their customers, they get a trusted brand that tells customers exactly what they're doing in terms of sustainability, in terms of innovation. And so that's the model that we've come up with. It's a big bet. It's not a playbook in our industry. It's a big bet, but we think this is a really great opportunity to build a trusted brand with those consumers, that sort of consumer pull through in the space. It's interesting. The team has been almost all R&D. When we raised our Series A in 2020, it was all R&D except for me, and I did everything
else.
R&D, right? People joke janitor, accountant, general accountant. Like I was doing all of those things. I've now hired a wonderful controller and head of finance and general counsel and things like that. But really only right now are we building out our commercial team. So even still, I mean, we're over, I don't know the exact number, but we're over 90% R&D still. And we're really just building out the marketing angle. Now that we've taken our technology to commercial scale, so we just hit a 50,000 liter fermentation, which is really exciting. We've announced our brand, Pomless, and we're going to roll out into first customers next year. It's like a total shift. It's kind of like we woke up and we were teenagers. It's like we went to bed at 3 and we woke up at 16. And so we're kind of playing catch up, but
hopefully without all the awkwardness.
Maybe we skipped those growing. I don't think so, but so it's challenging. It's also really fun, and I think my whole team loves it. And so we try to just do really good sort of all hands meetings where we share across the company what goes on, but like marketing is foreign speak to most people on my team, but they love it. And I think part of the reason they want to be here at this company and not in academia or not somewhere else is because they can see the impact of their work on shelves. And so I think they love it and it's fun, but we're still early days on it. I think it is, Marc, to your point, great opportunity to attract people like that. I think people coming who've spent 30 years in advertising saying, I want to go, this is my next act, right? I want to go spend my time here. I think we definitely see it's very compelling for recruiting on the marketing and the commercialization side.
Yeah. I think you've nailed the mission piece. One of the things that I really like, I like your classification as a consumer-based biotech company. A lot of times you'll have people that spend a lot of time talking to you about their science because they want you to be really impressed with the science that they've done, but you've really spent kind of a ton of time talking about why the product is valuable, why the product is needed, et cetera, where you get to the point that I imagine those are the things your customers care about, right? I can't imagine that your customers get overly enamored the cool trick you did with yeast, and they want to talk all about the variants of strains and things like that. I imagine that doesn't enter into your sales conversations all that much.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's right. And I think it's sometimes hard in this industry because we all love our technology.
Yep.
But that's exactly right. And I think when you are, we're a 4-year-old company at this point and we're commercializing. And again, for biotech, like that's quite early. That's quite soon to get into commercialization. And so you really have to sort of shift out of that and be thinking about, what problem am I solving? What's the application of this? How does the person I'm talking to think? I think it's important, and it's something, but we all slip into it. We all slip into it sometimes, and sometimes they do want to know, but I think it's also partly our job to stay away from that and talk about benefits and talk about sort of pain points that we're solving.
Yeah.
Seems like oh, sorry, go ahead.
Mark. No, go ahead, Mark.
It seems like your end customer is different than a traditional biotech, right? So I mean, to Derek's point, if you're geeking it up with the science aspect of it, right? You're talking science to scientists, because ultimately the end user is going to be different. Where here you're sort of on a consumer basis where people, on a normal, I don't know, if I'm buying something, I don't necessarily need to know all the science behind it. I just want to either trust the label and trust the mission statement of the company and things like that. So I mean, I think probably gives you a huge advantage in that respect.
Yeah, for the most part, we do have some. It's a good point. We actually do have some of those companies have internal fermentation teams or microbiology teams, for example. Some of them don't, but some of them do. And I think, quite frankly, like we're not sure yet if that's a good thing or a bad thing. So, I think we're evaluating across the board, like, does this benefit the partnership and make it a win-win, or does it threaten it and mean that they're not the most interesting customer? So I think we're still answering that question.
To that end, we actually had a question. So your technology, is it protected by patents or trade secrets? What's your IP approach?
Yeah, so I'll talk about this industry broadly, and then I'll talk about us more specifically. Industry broadly, for the most part, we're trying to recreate something which already exists in nature. And of course, you can't patent something that exists in nature. So it's different again, where we're not necessarily making a novel molecule. You file a patent on the composition of matter of the molecule, and that's your golden goose.
Right.
It's might be, but it's not so clear. And so what we've had to do, and I think as an industry, it's a combination. So you have to look at the whole technology stack. What are the innovations in the technology, and what are the innovations in the product and application thereof? And it often ends up being a combination of patents. It ends up being a combination of process patents and composition of matter patents, if you can get them. But if your product is truly identical, you can't file there.
Right.
And trade secrets. And so it really becomes a combination of saying, what are we doing that is so novel and non-obvious, and defensible, such that if someone were to infringe, it would be easy to prove that they were infringing on it. And then you kind of have to make a decision there. So I would say that the patent strategy has been complex, and it's a bit more robust. It's a bit more nuanced. And I think we as an industry are again still, and then again, the other part is like, we don't necessarily have the licensing upside on the end, or sort of, or even royalties financing or anything like that necessarily. And so it's less clear, but I think for most of us, IP is largely about protecting your own freedom to operate. So if you go to a company, if you go to a customer and they have a fermentation team or a technical team, do you make sure that you're protecting your right to go take your own innovation to market? I think that's like kind of baseline defense. The offense is, I think, still up for grabs. But yeah, combination of patents, trade secrets, process, and composition of matter.
So your IP counsel both loves and hates you.
I love my IP counsel. I think for me, IP in this space was like really hard. I was kind of like, it's not clear what the value of IP is here, and patents are expensive, and why are we filing this, and do we have to file this? It's not clear it's really going to lead anywhere. My IP counsel has, I think, done just a really good job of educating me. I mean, I think they've done a really good job of understanding the industry and how to think about IP as a strategy. And they've also done a really good job of bringing me and my team along in that. So I was like a total cynic on IP when we started the company. Like, this is a waste of money. It's not valuable here. But it's been interesting.
You've been brought around.
Yeah.
That's good.
So I have what I think is a good question for you. Like, you're kind of blazing this new path. Has anyone kind of done this before that you can kind of look to either for advice, inspiration, whatever? I mean, Regeneron famously say when Len and George talk about what really helped them make it as a company, they talk about when they got Roy Vagelos to join their board, right? So are you really, who do you look at as those kind of figures for whatever it is, inspiration, advice, et cetera? Has anybody done anything like what you're trying to do that you can draw from experience wise?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is not necessarily exactly your question, but, you know, there were other companies using microbiology to make lipids, and they were the biofuels companies. So there were a lot of companies using similar technology, but with totally different approaches about a decade ago.
Okay.
And we have learned a lot from them. And I think one of the reasons that I have a lot more confidence in our business and that we've been able to move so quickly is because of the lessons learned there. And a lot of that was technology was actually very good, but application to market, fundraising model, lack of validation on long-term cost structure, a lot of those things were not right. And so I think we were able to learn a lot of those lessons. So that's been helpful. But I mean, I think the Regeneron example is another part around, it's a lot about credibility, right? And I think it's a lot about just saying, like, you're solving this really important problem. It's also really big. And like, how do you convince everyone that the world will actually change in this way? Like, that's kind of fundamentally what innovations and startups are about. Like, I have to build something which can unlock a different version of the future. And I have to convince people that that future will exist. In fact, that it will be inevitable. And so I think for us, that's really what we're focused on now, is that the credibility that basically convinces people that this is not just possible, but that it's inevitable. And again, I think when you're just using technology, it's hard to get there. So you have to start moving into making it real and product and commercialization. And that's why we're so focused on that. And I think in 2023, it'll be a really exciting year for us as we get those products into market for the first time.
Yeah, no pressure on bringing about that future that you're telling everybody about, right?
That's okay. I'm ready to start looking on the beauty store shelves for Harmless. So Marc, as you think about your clients like C16 and others that are really sort of on the cutting edge, what is sort of the best advice you give them as to not only how to move their business forward, but how to do it sort of efficiently, and the things that you provide to them, right, as far as thought leadership?
I mean, I think for one, you know, Shara's surrounding herself with a great team. She's got IP counsel. She's funny. You know, she said she realized she needs a controller in there. She can't be the janitor and sort of the coffee maker and, you know, and everything. And I think finding the right team around you, and it's even your investors, right? I mean, I don't know all your investors, but I mean, you know, some investors are in it just to make a dollar, and some really want to be a partner with you for the long term. And so, you know, for yourself, understanding that those two, you know, sort of missions align and strategize. And I think just finding that you've got all of the right partners around you, whether it's your accountants, lawyers, internal team, HR team, if that's outsourced. I mean, people that find the same mission that you guys have. And I think a lot of times companies just jump in the early stages at anything that will help. You know, oh, I found a guy or a gal who can be my accountant, and, you know, I need somebody, so they just bring him in and then find out it's not the right person. Or, you know, they find you know, just some attorney who, you know, gets recommended and they don't have time to interview 20 of them, so they just take that you know, that one individual. They're, you know, the cost structure doesn't work for you and things like that. So I think it's just taking your time and making sure that folks understand where you want to be. And, you know, again, to your point, Shara, about, you know, creating a future that doesn't exist and that you have to convince people of what that future might be. But it's convincing the partners and the people you surround yourself with outside of your, immediate company of the same thing. And so I think that's just I think just taking it slow enough to find the right people in place and not just jumping at any opportunity or any partner because you think you need it. But that being said, I mean, as you do future fundraising and financing, financial statements have to be in order, your legal documents have to be in order. I mean, data rooms have to be populated and organized. I mean, those things all sound hokey and goofy, but it has to be there. And the first time an investor sees a data room that's just unorganized and missing documents, they naturally get a little turned off and just think there's problems here and things like that. So it's like the porridge is too hot, too cold. It's just right. You got to find, not somebody just to get them in there fast and not somebody to get them in there slow, and just find the right one. So,
you know anybody that can help with that, Marc?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, how about
that? Maybe the most important question we'll ask is, what were the Prince and Princess of Wales like?
So lovely. Yeah. So, about a week and a half ago, my co-founder and I had the opportunity to meet Prince William and Princess Kate. We were one of sort of 5 companies that got the chance to meet with them in Boston at Greentown Labs, which is where we originally got started. And they were really lovely and gracious. I mean, I think, they sort of opened up, they read the room. It was a bunch of young sort of people in startups. And so they were a bit more casual, although we were trained on proper protocol. And they asked a lot of great questions. They asked questions about the technology and applications. Kate was aware of palm oil because it's in most infant formula. So she had sort of come across it in infant formula. And then she asked about the beauty and personal care industry, acknowledging its sustainability problems with both ingredients, but also, of course, packaging, which is a really big issue from sustainability. So they were really nice, and we got to send them a little product sample and a palmless sticker and a book about the palm oil problem. So it was a huge honor, and they were just really, really lovely.
Yeah, as I was preparing for this morning, I was like, oh my gosh, I came across that, on one of the press releases. I was like, that is really cool, and not something we have ever talked about the royal family on this breakfast this morning.
Definitely a highlight.
I think it's a missed opportunity that we didn't tag the paparazzi on Twitter. I don't see how we don't have now 1,000 members of the British press hearing what we have to say about the prince and princess.
Well, I mean, to your question earlier, I think even small things like that are huge,
Yeah.
And Marc, to your point, our lead investor on our last round is Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is, a credible, large climate focused organization. Their first fund was $1 billion, but started by Bill Gates, right? And I think having people like that bought into solving the climate problem. And I was yesterday with, I know we're about to run out of time, but was yesterday with a woman who's a public markets investor who was one of the sort of really early leaders on the gene therapy side. And we were talking about how sort of syndicate of funds focused on gene therapy really came about. And I think we still need that in climate. So I think we're starting to get that, but we need to start getting that right sort of cadre of investors that can really bring credibility and capital to companies along the capital stack. And we're getting there, but it's still early days.
Yeah. Well, we very much appreciate both of you being with us and sharing your stories and your expertise. We also look forward to more things with Palmless on the front next year. We'll be sure and highlight that through NewYorkBIO, as well as my own personal beauty purchases. But really, thank you so much for your time today. I thought this was extremely interesting. I know I learned a lot, and I know our audience did. We hope everyone has a great end of the year. The virtual breakfast will be back in January. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
All right, bye, everybody.